So today's video is going to be about gang violence. And the reason I really wanted to make this video was because I feel like when it comes to liberalism, and this is something that I talk about probably too much, quite frankly. When it comes to liberalism, the way that it functions and the way that it's able to sustain this economy that's built on death, built on deprivation, built on suffering, it's through a number of myths. It's through explaining things not as they exist, but as liberals would like them to exist for the purposes of, just continuing the same system as it already exists. And that sort of analysis is useless. And in order to become effective political actors, in order to be people who can change the world, we must actually understand what the world is. And so when it comes to gang violence, I have a very, very simple proposition, which is that gang violence is not only not its own separate sort of category of violence, but that gang violence is a simple byproduct of capitalism. In addition to that, when it comes to our government responses to gang violence, you can see very clearly that governments have much less of an issue with the gangs and the violence that they cause, especially given the fact that other parts of the economy cause similar violence. But gangs really have an issue with these communities organizing parallel governance structures. Gangs are separate, completely cordoned off from the government that most people find legitimate, and therefore they are a threat because you don't want gangs to gain ground or gain legitimacy in the eyes of the communities they represent. So on the first point, on the point that gang violence is simply capitalist violence, what do I mean by that? Well, when you think about gangs, all gangs are engaged in the same activity, ultimately. It may not be the same particular thing. Some gangs sell drugs, some gangs sell arms, some gangs sell protection from their own violence. There are lots of different strategies to this. But ultimately, gangs are concerned with making money, with producing revenue. Gangs are usually relegated to parts of commerce that are outside of what we have legalized formally in our societies. So that's where you see drug trafficking being such a large one. It's not legal to traffic drugs, or at least not the kinds of drugs, the particular drugs that gangs traffic in: heroin, cocaine, marijuana. It's legal to traffic in other drugs, as you see with Big Pharma, but it's not legal to traffic in these drugs. And as a result, gangs, they need to establish a lot of different. They need organizational capacity. They need to be able to change things. They need to be able to direct action. They need lots of tools. And the best way to get those tools is to organize into something that resembles a state much more than it resembles, some sort of a backyard school club. And when it comes to the violence of these gangs, people die for a number of reasons in gang-related incidents. As somebody from a place where lots of people were dying all the time, South Central Los Angeles, it's a very familiar thing. But people die in gang-related incidents for usually a number of reasons, but they usually will pertain directly to that money aspect that I mentioned earlier. So it'll either be you have stolen money from me, you're stopping me from getting money in some way, you're trying to encroach on my territory, you're threatening my pockets, therefore you got to go, or you're threatening my life, which obviously that would get the same response. But what this is effectively a separate legal system. This is street violence as opposed to state violence. And I drew a little diagram to demonstrate what I mean, but I'll get to that later actually. But yeah, gangs. So the violence and the death of gangs and the intimidation and all of those things, they are definitely a problem in many ways. But the problem is not that these people are gang banging, therefore it's bad. The problem is these people are exercising unregulated, restricted capitalism in their communities, thereby devastating them. Well, that brings us to the question: why do gangs exist if gangs are causing so many problems for the communities in which they live? Well, to respond to that question, I think the first thing that we must ask ourselves is what sort of violence are we subjected to in our own economic system, or in our own formal government systems? State, federal, and local pay taxes to them all, and all of these branches of government are primarily concerned with spending money on weapons, spending money on things to kill people, whether that be at the federal level, the U.S. military, or at local levels, police forces. Our governments are very concerned with violence, and not only on the side of inflicting violence to control the population, which is what police forces do and what militaries do to foreign countries, but also violence within the system itself. Now, unlike gangs, where the violence is very simple, very plain to see, it's almost unsophisticated. States have a lot more tools at their disposal to make their violence compatible with everyday life, to make their violence seem as if it's justified, even when, and this is almost always the case, it is not. States do a very simple thing. It's called abstraction. So instead of the violence being something very present, you did this, so you're going to die now. The violence needs a couple of layers removed from the rationale, so that we can then say, oh well, this is actually justice. This is not senseless violence. It's justice. Did this person steal something from a store? Then we're going to have a trial. We're going to have a procedure, and at the end of that procedure, the consequences are going to be whatever sort of violence we decide is commensurate with the crime committed. So the states and gangs both exercise the same sort of, we need to enforce in our communities, and we are in charge of figuring out how things are run here. But for examples of the capitalist violence that's not directly that's not directed by the state, think of the pharmaceutical industry. Now that's an industry that's entire purpose is to supply people healthcare, or not even the pharmaceutical industry on its own, but healthcare in general. A fifth of our economy in the United States, trillions of dollars every single year they make. How? On keeping us healthy? Well, I don't think we look healthy, do we? Or a lot of people don't look as healthy as they probably ought to. But all the dead people from our big pharma system, all those people who die, and I think the number is probably rising. It's probably closer to 60,000 a year now than the studies that I'm more familiar with, which are from like 2019, 2018, 2017. But thousands of people die every single year, not just because we're an unhealthy country and we don't put the investment that we should in making sure that our citizens are cared for, but directly because a pharmaceutical company says you will not receive this treatment, and go die about it. That's a real thing that happens in our economy. But since it happens through these bureaucracies, since it happens because a person denied a claim, they didn't sentence you to death, they didn't deny your claim. They didn't sentence you to bankruptcy, they denied your claim. We formalize these processes, or these violent processes, instead of allowing them to exist in their natural form, where it's a lot clearer how negatively they impact people. Which brings to the next issue, or actually, I think I mentioned this a little bit, but a little somewhat. Anyways, when it comes to gangs and why gangs are able to operate because they are made up of people from communities that are underfunded, marginalized, to whatever extent, and who then see this gang life as a better alternative than just being ground into a juice by the violent forces of the state. So you saw this in American history with Irish people. You saw this with Black people. You saw this with Italians as well, all establishing their own sorts of illegal enterprises, whether it was selling alcohol, selling drugs, whatever it is, selling protection. And so these communities are broken down, they're marginalized, pushed to the side. And then out from that marginalization pop up these other sorts of governing forces, which are then able to be used as justification by our government, our state, to then crack down on these gangs further. But when they're cracking down on these gangs, they're not simply dismantling them, because to dismantle these gangs would be to dismantle the financial incentives that cause people to organize this way. It would be to dismantle the racist structures that create these conditions within these communities. That's not what police are doing. That's not what our government is interested in doing when it comes to gangs. Our government instead is interested in using the gangs as a tool to maintain the violence that they already imposed on these communities, while at the same time worsening the conditions, and then using the gangs as a tool for the non-marginalized communities to then say, oh, well, that's why all their problems, clearly is their fault. They should just do different stuff because they're doing all the wrong stuff, and we do the right stuff, and so we're good. We do it formally through these state structures, so it's okay. We kill people, we harm people, sell harmful substances, all kinds of things, but as long as we do it the right way, it's okay. When we do it the wrong way, it's not okay. So that brings me to this sort of graph or diagram that I constructed. I don't know if it's going to be. Oh, thank God it's not reflected. So here, let's figure out how to get this on the screen properly. So, okay, I'm completely out of the video. In the case of gang violence, street violence, you have the street. That is your arena. This is the government. This is the thing that holds everything together. It's the street. It's the gang. It's the rules of people who live outside of the rules. And so for an individual person, you must follow the code of the streets. You must not take things from people. You must respect people, or else you're going to receive consequences. But you won't receive consequences, as in the case of the state, from a police officer, from the law. You'll receive consequences from the person. So that's the thing about gang violence as well that makes it so much more adaptable, so much more dynamic than a formalized state structure. You are the person in charge of making sure that you're respected, that the things that you care about are placed in order. Then in the state example, you see a slightly different organization, where this is the state up here. The state creates the laws, the state hires the police, and the police are the relationship that you have with the law. You don't have a direct relationship, as in the case of the gangs, with the code that you follow. You have an enforcer, a state sponsored enforcer who can act on your behalf. Moreover, you as a citizen, you work at a job, and you work for a corporation, you work for a company that is formally sanctioned by the state. In the case of gang members, they work on the on the corner. They work at whatever their position is, and they're sanctioned. They're not sanctioned by anybody. They're clients of this kingpin, this person who's able to traffic large amounts of drugs into the country. And again, all of this governed by the rules of the street, all within this apparatus. Whereas in the case of the government, you have a slightly different organization. But ultimately, you're seeing the exact same things play out in both cases. You're seeing people organize you're seeing an organized economy emerge, and you're seeing capitalism in full action. So if we're going to try to understand and address gang violence seriously as a society, we need to address the structural components of it first, as opposed to looking at the violence and saying what we need is gun control, as opposed to saying we need after school programs, which surely help, but some communities need after school programs and others don't. The problem is not that they don't have the after school programs. The problem is that they need them, and they need them because they have been marginalized. They've been pushed to the side. All this is to say, gang violence, it's certainly a thing that exists, but it's not real in the sense of being its own sort of unique, separate thing. It's really just a part of the broader system that we exist in. And in order to beat that, we've got to recognize that.